We're at the point now where we have a running app where we can generate numbers by clicking on the button here. Generates random numbers into the fields. So the next step is to adapt this program so that it does two things. Number one, it retains the numbers when we rotate, and what I mean by that is if we rotate the device here, which initiates an app restart, we see the numbers are gone. And obviously if I rotate the device back, we're back to square one. This is the 4.3 device. It seems in version 4.4.2 that text views like this are automatically saved into the bundle and we don't need to intervene. But to be compatible with pre-442 devices, we need to follow what I'm going to do in this tutorial. Okay, so let's go back to our code. So the most important part of the code up until now was this method here. This was the method that we specified in the properties file of the button in the OnClick section. So this is what responds to the click. As previously mentioned, that only works for OnClick listeners. Other types of listeners, we have to follow a more traditional method of adding listeners programmatically. So I'm going to go through that first. So the first thing we'll do is come over here and create a new class called my button click listener, and it implements the interface on click listener. Now there are two on click listeners, as you can see here, and it is the second of the two. So an Android.view on click listener, not the Android content dialog interface. That's something completely different. Okay, so we now have our new listener class. Now here we have to implement the onClick method. Now basically speaking, that should do the same thing as our generate numbers button clicked method. So let's take the code from there, which was in our method of our main activity, and move it over into the onClick. Okay, so we have some problems appearing here, and the problem here is that the findViewById method is a method inherited by the activity class. So it was okay when we called it in the activity class, because our class main activity extended activity. But now this class here is not part of that hierarchy. It only implements this OnClick listener interface, so it doesn't know what this method is. So the easiest way to get around that is to pass the activity to this listener when we create it. So for that we can write a constructor which takes an activity and stores it as a member or instance variable of this listener class. So, like you've all seen in constructors before, it's this dot activity equals activity. just need to organize our imports. So source organize imports will import android.app.activity. Now here we just need to change the word super here. We're no longer referring to the super class, we are referring to this activity reference that we have. So that will change to this dot activity, and so on for the others. Okay, so that's our new listener class written. So we can now go back to our main activity. We can now get rid of the handler method that we had there before, which we pointed at in the onClick, the properties of the button. So now what we want to do is on create, we want to first of all get a reference to our button and then add our OnClickListener onto that button. Okay, so we're back now in the activity class, so we can do super.find view by ID, and we put in the ID of the button, which is button 1. And we know that's a button, being the generate button. So we can cast the view reference which comes back to a button because we know it is a button. There I've just imported android.widget.button. The next thing to do is add the listener onto this button. So we do generate button dot set OnClickListener, and here then we create a new instance of our my button click listener. And here's the key part: we want to pass in a reference to this activity, so we use the word this to pass in this object. And this object that we're in at the moment is main activity. So if we run that, we should have exactly the same behavior that we had before, but now we're using a traditional method of adding listener, not the properties view. Okay, the next piece of functionality that we want to add to this app is saving of state. So you can see here we can generate random numbers. However, once we initiate an app restart, and the easiest way to do that is to rotate the screen, we see there that we lose state. It doesn't save the state of those numbers in the fields, and they're lost. So what do we do to address that? Well, what we need to do is override another lifecycle method in our activity class. So we've already done the onCreate. So what we want to do now is on save instance state, and this gives us a reference to the bundle object, which will allow us to store information in there in key value pairs. So we're going to keep this simple. All we need to do is store the actual values in those fields. So what we need to do first off is look up each one of those fields and pull the text out of them. So we do super dot find view by ID or dot ID, and they are our 6 fields: edit text 01 to edit text 06. So we just copy and paste that for each of them. Now we know that each one of those is going to return a text view, not just a view, so we can cast it to that. So we can say text view v1 equals and cast to text view. And we organize imports and import Android.widget.textView up above. So we just continue and complete that for the other 6 fields. Give them all a different variable name, obviously. So what we want to do for each of these fields is save the text from that field to the bundle. So we do b dot put character sequence, and the key can be whatever we want, so let's use the key v1, and the character sequence is what we get out of the text view, so it's v1 dot get text. And then just exactly the same for all the fields. Okay, one very important thing to do at the end of this method is to call super.onSaveInstanceDate and pass b, because there are other things that are saved by this method. In other words, if we didn't override this method, it's already doing stuff. So we are just adding on our extra bit here. And we're now calling back up to the superclass implementation that was already there and say you do whatever you were doing before. So that will save the state of all those texts to the bundle when this app is put into the background in the first part of a restart. So then when it's restarted, we want to do the opposite, obviously. Read stuff out of the bundle and put it back into the text fields. So we override another lifecycle method. This one is called onRestore instance state. And again, passes us a reference to the bundle object. So here we'll do the same thing again. get a reference to all the text views. But instead of putting their text out this time, obviously we are reading text from the bundle and putting it back into the text view. So to read the text out of the bundle, we do b dot get car sequence, and we put in the key, the same key that we used up above. So we used v1, v2, v3, v4 down to v6. So they're the keys that are in the bundle that we use to retrieve. So what we can do is set that straight into the field. So we can do v1 dot set text and set in the character sequence we've just retrieved from the bundle, and all the way down through the fields. And like with the onSaveInstance state method above, we also need to call super.onRestoreInstanceState, pass the bundle to it so that it calls the superclass implementation also. So let's test this out and see if it works. Here we go, we click generate numbers, and now when we change the orientation of the device, the numbers retain their state. So what's happening there is it's saving to the bundle on a restart. So when you rotate, you get a device restart, so it saves and then restores.